Presenting
The Complete
Orson Welles
and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
as the third man.
Stand by.
We'll be on the air in 15 seconds, Mr. Wells. Yes, I know.
Stand by, everybody.
Mercury Theater on the Air presents Orson Welles as Count Dracula in his own version of Bram Stoker's great novel,
Who knows
Dracula.
what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Hello world, welcome to The Complete Orson Welles, brought to you by Dwayne Old Time Radio. This podcast will feature various classic radio programs ranging mostly from 1936 to 1952 that Orson either produced and directed, was featured on, or starred as a guest. If you enjoy my podcast, you can subscribe to receive notifications of new posts. Subscribing is free and only takes a moment. New episodes are posted weekly. If inclined, please leave a rating and or review on your preferred podcast service. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoyed the genius of Mr. Welles. This week we have the Orson Welles Commentaries. These are short commentaries, only about 14 to 15 minutes long, so I'm going to post two of his commentaries. The first one aired October 7th, 1945, and it is titled Nazi Tribunals, then GI Bill of Rights, and then Hollywood Parties. That is the fourth episode of the commentaries. The fifth episode of the Orson Welles Commentaries aired October 14th, a week later, 1945. And this has three stories. The first is Ike and Patton, then Competitive Nationalism, and then it ends with No Man is an Island.
Orson Welles again, come to call for another Sunday visit. Ladies and gentlemen, our fighting men coming back to us aren't getting the breaks they deserve. The war criminals are getting all the breaks they deserve. And then some. I'll tell you about it in just a minute.
Just a word about the sponsor of this program, Lear Incorporated. Lear, that's spelled L-E-A-R, builds fine radios. Although Lear radios have been made since 1930, up to now they've been for a very special use. They've been aircraft radios. Radios made as perfect as radio science could make them. Now, Lear is making home radios as well. And these, too, are made with the advanced engineering and conscientious craftsmanship that have become typical of Lear manufacture. One of the brand new developments you find in Lear home radios is the Lear wire that remembers. It's a simple way of making lasting recordings of your children's voices, your family songs, the talents of your friends. Or you can take programs right off the air, record them, and hear them again and again, thousands and thousands of times. It's done by a spool of hair-size wire that glides over a magnet and picks up every note, tone, and inflection. The recording can be just a few words or hours long. And anything you don't want to keep can be erased simply by recording something else over it. You've never seen recording like this before. It's something you'll want in your radio. You get it in Lear radios. Now, Mr. Welles brings you his views and opinions on events as he sees them. His opinions are his own and do not necessarily represent the views of Lear Incorporated.
That great and greatly hopeful conception, the United Nations, is in business again. That's the best news of the week. The efficient cooperation behind the war criminal trials starting in Nuremberg is in stark and cheerful contrast to the last conference in London. 4 prosecutors, American Supreme Court Justice Jackson, British Chief Prosecutor Shawcross, Russia's Rudchenko, and the French legalist de Montant, are building a code that will be binding above and beyond the ties of country. Quietly, carefully, since last June, they've been preparing a momentous 20,000-word indictment presented this week against 24 top Nazi war criminals. In all truth, it's more than an indictment. It's a brave step in the direction of a law-abiding world community. These men have been exploring and mapping a new realm of law, new in that it specifically rules out the defenses accepted in the old so-called international law. From now on, leaders are responsible for all individual actions under them. Being one of the rulers of a state is no defense, nor is acting on orders a defense. And this is important. If an individual or group is found guilty, the whole group can be found guilty through him. Two of the men on trial are Arthur Seyss-Inquart and Ernest Kaltenbrunner. Both were SS men of high rank. If they are convicted and the court also finds the Austrian SS guilty, each nation can try the small fry in its own court, where the only proof needed would be that of membership in the guilty organization. This will speed up all the trials, but don't expect this first one to go too quickly. Although the court can review evidence before it's submitted so that the defendants can't bring in extraneous material to take up time and becloud the issue, and also perhaps prevent embarrassment to some Allied leaders who might be connected with the appeasement of the 30s and the encouragement of Germany's plan for aggressive war in the East. If we're ever to have international police force, there must be international law, real law, not a set of conventions. So watch the lawmakers, the lawyers, and the judges in Nuremberg. The cause of peace and all our hopes for a free, abundant world depend on those trials. They may be a cornerstone for world democracy, may make it possible for us to go on being fruitful and multiplying and replenishing the earth in the same universe with the atomic bomb. Well, things are looking just a little bit better this week for the GI Bill of Rights. GI Bill of Rights. It sounds good, doesn't it? So it's settled everything. Well, it does not. The bill is supposed to provide a discharged veteran with $4,000 for the purchase of a home, a small farm, or a small business. But if a vet can't furnish collateral for the other half or can't provide endorsers satisfactory to the bank, he's just out of luck. You can thank a nice little lobby, the loan company's lobby, for that one. As first proposed, the GI Bill of Rights would have authorized loans directly by the government. But the moneylenders fought for private loans at 6%, and they won a compromise with all the weight in their favor. It's 4% now. It's private loans. It shouldn't be, but it is. Despite the provisions of the Social Security law, some veterans are not getting their jobs back, and for education, more money is needed desperately. The unemployment provision allows for $20 a week up to 52 weeks any time in 2 years, but a vet is not qualified for this. If he leaves suitable employment voluntarily, if he's fired for his conduct, or if he fails to accept suitable employment offered by the U.S. Employment Service, or, and look out for this one, it's a great, big, juicy, anti-labor joker, if work stoppage is due to labor disputes, unless the veteran is not participating or interested in the dispute. You can see what that adds up to. An awful lot of servicemen are union men. I don't think they'll go for that one. The news from Washington is encouraging. This week, Senator George's Finance Committee has been holding public hearings on the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1945 as passed by the House of Representatives. Amendments, which will probably pass the Senate, answer many general criticisms of the GI Bill of Rights. The educational provisions are liberalized. The subsistence allowance for students has been raised. The new bill will permit loans at reasonable value as determined by the lender's appraisal. Vets will still probably get rooked because prices are inflated and bankers may encourage loans for almost any purpose because there's so much money around. What does it add up to? As it stands now, how does the GI Bill meet the veterans' needs and wants? I'll try to tell you. The war is won. The oceans are filled with ships bringing veterans, victorious warriors back to America. Transport docks in the East River and soldiers pour down the gangplank. Where you going, soldier? Home, he says. I'm a plumber. I've got a wife and 2 kids in Kansas City. I've got a business. Wife's been carrying on. Well, he's okay. As it stands now, the GI Bill is okay for him. Let's try the next man. Where you going, soldier? Wilkesboro. That's where I come from. I was a coal miner, but don't get me wrong. I don't want my old job back. I'm a mechanic now. A skilled mechanic. No more of the pits for me. I want a better job. I can handle it. Sure he can. He's learned a lot of soldiering, and he wants to use what he's learned to make things better for himself and his folks. But here at home, the war industries have trained a lot of skilled mechanics, too. Tremendous lot of them. They've got jobs now. Will room be made for this returning GI, or is he going to have to go back to the coal pits in order to live? Here comes another veteran. Veteran sounds like an old man, but this one's a little more than a boy. Where you going, soldier? Me? I'm going back to school. I hope I am. I can't be sure, but I don't know whether I'll be able to afford it. The government's promised me $50 a month while I'm in college, but I'm not sure whether I can make out on that. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm grateful, but I'm doubtful, too. Of course, our young veteran has his doubts. He has his reasons, good reasons. It costs a lot to eat and sleep these days. He'll need a part-time job to swing it, and there are boys and girls just leaving high school for universities who'll need a job. Unless we're mobilized for peace, a lot of these kids and a lot of veterans are the same age are going to be competing for the same jobs? That question's tough. We're going to have to answer it pretty soon. And look, here comes another fellow. We're going to have to think about him, too. Where are you going, soldier? You're asking me. As if I knew you were asking me. What do you think I've been asking myself these last 2 years in Africa, and then in Italy, and then in France, and in Germany? I don't know where I'm going. So I tell you, I just don't know. We asked him if he didn't make some sort of plan. Listen, he says, when you get as close to as many bullets as I did, you think of tomorrow in a different sort of way. Like there isn't any tomorrow. He'll need help, too. He'll need lots of help. He shouldn't have to get it by selling apples on street corners. Here comes another down the gangplank back home after the war, and another, and another. Where are you going, soldier? We're going to ask that question 1 million times. 10 million times. And we'll get 10 million answers. In Army and Navy camps all over the country where I've had the privilege of entertaining servicemen and women, they've shot questions at me, questions that hit dead center. Those men and women aren't asking each other, where are you going? They're asking us, where we'll be, now that they're coming back. And the GI Bill, it turns out, just isn't good enough as an answer. It's only a stopgap. Our best laws only partially cover conditions as we see them now. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a big job ahead of us. 12 million men are marching home. Let's not ask, where are you going, soldier? Let's be ready for them, so all we need to say to them is just hello. Just hello. And if a soldier wants anything more from us by way of conversation, let's be able to say, look at the map, brother. From New York State to the state of Washington, from the mountains of California to the Everglades, this is your land. And more than ever, it's the land of opportunity. Take the map home and study it. Pick the road you want to travel, and, brother, here's your ticket and the fare to see you through. All the way. Well, I have a story for you I'd like to tell in just a minute before saying goodbye. But first, an important announcement.
For just a moment, let me tell you a little more about Lear radios. For more than 15 years, only aviators got them. But now you can have one for your home. And like Lear aircraft radios, Lear home radios are made with unusual care, craftsmanship, and keen appreciation of what lies ahead. For example, you'll find in the beautiful Lear console sets an entirely new contribution to your convenience in adjusting the programs to your liking. You'll find some with television, some with high-fidelity FM, with world-girdling shortwave. And some will have the Lear wire recorder I told you about before, and that you've read about in the ads. With all their new features, Lear radios are right along in price with sets that offer far less. At the top of the line, there's a handsome console with television, the wire recorder, and the finest of everything. It sells for about $500. And a neat, capable table model sells at the $19.95 level. Well, before the holidays, you'll be able to go to your Lear dealer and hear these Lear radios yourself. Then you'll see exactly how really fine they are. We know you're going to agree that you get the most value for your investment in the radio with the nameplate L-E-A-R, the Lear radio. And now a few words about next week.
Well, the war is really over in Hollywood, not the labor war. That isn't over by a long shot. I mean the social dim-out, the Saturday night sobriety that marked the years of that shooting war, which was so very, very, very far away from Hollywood and Vine. Mike Romanoff tells me he's giving a masked ball where all the guests will be required to come in costume of their ancestors, which for a Hollywood party seems a pretty daring idea. And last night, Elsa Maxwell, without reference to a single worthy cause beyond the pleasant purpose of hospitality, threw a shindig of old-time lavishness in Mike's saloon. The chief event was a cooking contest, and among those entered were Clark Gable, Joe Cotton, Sonia Heine, Van Johnston, and Claudette Colbert. And on the word go, they all started cooking on little stoves provided for the game. And on the word stop, the results were handed over to the judges, Jack Warner, Darrell Zanuck, L.B. Mayer, and David Selznick. I don't know what the judges had to say about those results, but you can take my word for it that nothing ever tasted or smelt so awful since the world began. I don't know who won, but I can report that before entering the contest, Joan Fontaine, who's been having one of the more serious disagreements with her producer, made the following official statement. I'll cook it if David Selznick will eat it. We left early, not because Elsa's journalistic career has in any way reduced her talents as a party thrower, but because I rather hoped to get to the strike meeting, a rival event last night. We didn't make it, but I'll tell you about that strike next week. Would like to tell you a story. Pat O'Brien told me this one. Seems he was taking his son back to military school after a weekend at home. On the way, they passed that big veterans hospital out at Sawtell and the miles and miles of crosses in the soldiers' cemetery. Crosses look like they're standing at attention. Rest in peace, the saying goes, but somehow you can't believe that in those blank battalions, the order will ever be heard at ease. They were burying another hero that Monday morning, and as Pat and his little boy drove by, they heard the volley being fired over the grave. Were all those soldiers? Pat's little son wanted to know, looking out over the standardized infinity of tombstones. Pat said yes, they were all soldiers, the men buried there. Were they once little boys like me? Yes, they were little boys, just like you. Pat's little son thought that one over for a minute. Then they weren't born soldiers, he asked, and Pat said no, and they drove on for a while in silence. They all died for their country? Yes. They weren't very old, were they? No, they weren't. My, there were a lot of them had to die. You know what, Daddy? Said Pat's little son. I think God was just wasting his time. Well, next week I'll have another story for you, a ghost story if you don't mind. Till then, my sponsors, the makers of Lear Radio, and I remain as always obediently yours.
This is the American Broadcasting Company.
10:30 at KECA, Los Angeles. Stay tuned to this station for KECA's new program, Orson Welles.
Orson Welles speaking. We'll start this broadcast with an amusing and little-known fact. Here goes. Cecil B. DeMille, the Hollywood motion picture producer, invented the salute used by the fascists. I'll tell you about that story in just a minute.
For just a moment, let me tell you a little about Lear Incorporated, the makers of Lear radios. The name is spelled L-E-A-R. It's very probable that you haven't seen it on a radio set, even though Lear has been making radio sets for more than 15 years. The reason is the radios Lear has been making up to now have been very special radios. Radios built exclusively for airplanes. You see, aircraft radios have to be far in advance of ordinary design, far in the lead when it comes to operating with unfailing reliability. They have to be the best the field can offer, for the security of the plane, the pilot, and the passengers often rests on them. This is the kind of manufacture that Lear knows. It's a standard that's keyed the entire Lear organization. Now, Lear is building home radios. And these instruments will share with the aircraft radios that knowledge of design, engineering skill, and ability to look ahead that have marked Lear's radio manufacture for 15 years. Later on, we'll tell you something about the sets themselves. Meanwhile, remember this when you see the Lear home radio. Since 1930, Lear has been the name men fly by. Now, Mr. Welles brings you his views and opinions on events as he sees them. The opinions are his own and do not necessarily represent the views of Lear Incorporated.
In spite of our political differences of opinion, and they are considerable, I must emphasize that when C.B. DeMille invented the salute used by the fascists, he didn't know he was doing any such thing and didn't mean at all to contribute to the effectiveness of Mussolini's and later Hitler's showmanship. The stiff-arm greeting of the fascisti is generally presumed to be a revival from the days of the Roman Empire, but I can find no historical record that any of the Caesars were hailed by that now famous salute. The gesture first appeared in one of the more grandiose of C.B.'s silents, The Eternal City. The Duce loved the way all the Hollywood extras raised their arms at the approach or mention of the Hollywood Caesar, so the sawdust Caesar of modern Rome plagiarized it. As a matter of fact, a great part of the pomp and pageantry of the fascist parades and spectacles was just so much stolen Cecil B. DeMillinary. Let's not be beastly to the Germans, sang General Patton. Let's not be horrid to the Hun. Noting his tune, we said on this program we thought old Blood and Guts couldn't get out of that big Bavarian mess he walked into. Well, he got out. Ike Eisenhower kicked him out. This move should not come as a surprise to all of General Eisenhower's admirers and most of General Patton's. It should be noted, however, that there are many other unpunished Army officials who are being nice to the Nazis. I talked to an Army friend of mine about this the other day. Not my good friend George Marshall, another George, another good friend. He's an infantry lieutenant of no historical or social renown, but he's been around quite some in this man's war. What he talked about was his general, the best darn division commander in the U.S. Army, George called him. All his life, George said, the old man spent getting the military know-how. He took over our division in 1943, and in a week we knew that here was a man we'd willingly follow into combat. When we got overseas and came up against the Germans, it really paid off. Now and then we heard from officers around us. We'd sometimes pick up stragglers and whole battalions and companies. And they'd lay it into their CO for all sorts of tactical errors and strategical miscalculations. But in our outfit, we never thought we'd lost a soul through any fault we could trace back to the old man. After VE Day, we got an occupational assignment in the American zone in Europe. Some of us who had some idea of Nazis looked forward to that, but we were in for a lot of disappointment. Soon we had former Nazis serve as our translators, and some moving in to be our informers. They'd put the finger on anti-Nazis, accusing them of sabotage and such, and our only real friends among the Germans would wind up inside our stockade. Jews and the DPs stayed in the concentration camp. We slept in the mud and tents, and fat krauts stayed in their warm homes they'd kept by Heiling Hitler. There's only one way to get into those homes, by fraternizing. So 95% of us did. It was plain enough that the old man had no idea why he'd been killing Germans. Just fought, that was all. And how he fought. In war, he was as relentless and sure as the Mississippi. And suddenly, in peace, as shallow and uncertain as a summer breeze. I still love him. I'm convinced that I'd be dead with a bunch of my buddies if it weren't for the old man. But I do think it's unfair for a man who spent his whole life studying war and winning 2 of them to be expected to win the peace, too. He's been too busy learning how to fight war to learn what causes them. So spoke my friend, the second Louis, on the subject of his old general. I think George helps to explain what happened to Patton. I hear a good deal of talk nowadays about making General Eisenhower Secretary General of the New World Organization. I'm for it. If there's a better man for the job than Eisenhower, I don't know who he is. But it will be very necessary to have on Ike's staff a number of genuinely well-informed civilians, so we don't repeat the mistakes we made in Germany, are making in Germany, mistakes we're making in Japan. And speaking of world organization, Russia is presently very much on the defensive as to what she can expect from it. We told you the London Conference of Foreign Ministers would be a flop. We're very sorry to say we were right, but don't think that flop weakened the ultimate validity of the United Nations organization. It emerges now as the only real hope of world peoples for world peace. The truth is that the atom bomb has canceled the last atom of sense in the old-fashioned notion of competitive, sovereign nationalism. Canceled that notion quite as finally as gunpowder canceled the bow and arrow. Just about everybody in the world knows this, except the leaders of the world. Just about everybody, except those leaders, realizes that keeping the peace calls for a police system and a court of law, which means final central authority, something bigger than any nation and stronger. This ceased to be theoretical or visionary and became desperately factual on August 6, 1945. Since the first atom bomb exploded, it's been as plain as the nose on Mr. Bevan's face, as simple as Harry Truman's smile, as undeniable as Stalin's mustache. Suppose the United States had tried to live together without a federal government, and even with it, you remember, we had a civil war. Suppose the states were held together by treaties and alliances instead of by a constitution and the authority of Washington. Well, California would have long since annexed Colorado, or tried to, in the interests of security. Iowa would be demanding a port on the Pacific Ocean, and Brooklyn would have taken over New York for Lebensraum. We have our troubles as it is, but just imagine what it'd be like in our part of the continent without a Congress, a Supreme Court, or a national army. Imagine what the world is going to be like, say, 50 or 100 years from now, without a world Congress or a global Supreme Court, and an international army. Well, the woman from Weehawken is still writing me at great length. Sorry I haven't got room this week to deal with her latest letter in full. I will take up the matter of fortune-telling. She took umbrage at something said on this program a while back about soothsaying and prognostication. I said there wasn't any such thing, and she says I ought to know better. Madam, you claim there are genuine fortune-tellers, honest people who can really peer into the future and tell what they see. If you know any personally, will you please ask them the following questions? Will our government agree on a fixed policy on wage levels, price control, and security in time to save us all from scuttling prosperity and wrecking domestic peace? Will our government agree to agree with other governments? Will all governments agree on one government before this one world of ours gets too small for our new toys and joins the anonymity of space as just another spinning globe of ash? The woman in Weehawken wants to know why I say the welfare of a woman on the other side of the world is her welfare. And rather than read her another one of my vest pocket sermons on the interdependence of man and one-worldness in general, I'm referring her to John Donne, who lived a couple of centuries ago and had this to say on the subject. Now this bell, tolling softly for another, says to me, thou must die. Perchance he for whom this bell tolls may be so ill as that he knows not it tolls for him. And perchance I may think myself so much better than I am as that they who are about me and see my state may have caused it to toll for me, and I know not that. All mankind is of one author, and is one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. God employs several translators. Some pieces are translated by age, some by sickness, some by war, some by justice. But God's hand is in every translation, and his hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves again for that library where every book shall lie open, one to another. As therefore the bell that rings to a sermon calls not upon the preacher only, but upon the congregation to come, so this bell calls us all. But how much more me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness? The bell doth toll for him that thinks it doth. And though it intermit again, yet from that minute that occasion wrought upon him, he is united to God. Who casts not up his eye to the sun when it rises, but who takes off his eye from a comet when that breaks out? Who bends not his ear to any bell which upon any occasion rings, but who can remove it from that bell which is passing a piece of himself out of this world? No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Now, in just a moment, I'd like to tell you about a new motion picture, but first, an important announcement.
Way back in 1930, Lear began making radios for airplanes. Now, Lear is making home radios as well, and what radios they are. A whole line of handsome sets you'll delight to look at and listen to. Some have television. Some include high-fidelity, static-free FM. There are models with record players and automatic record changers. And some will have the new Lear wire recording you've been reading about. With all their fine background and unusual excellence, you'll find Lear radios are not high in price. The masterpiece of them all, that includes television, automatic record changer, and the best of everything, is $500. At the other end of the line, there's a very capable, good-to-look-at table model at $19.95. The one best way to appreciate what Lear is contributing to home radio is to hear these new sets themselves. Soon you can go to your Lear dealer and have him play them for you. We're sure you'll agree that you get more radio value for every dollar you pay for a Lear radio. And now a few words about next week.
In Hollywood, you know, we've never managed to make the grade of spy thriller, which is the best thing the British do in movies. I think I have the right to say this because I've written a couple of these and produced one of them, and my spy stories are even worse than my compatriots. Now I'm glad to announce that a picture about secret agents and such characters good enough to stand with Hitchcock, his English period, and the top Carol Reed has finally been made in America. The film is called The House on 92nd Street. It's playing at your local theater now, or will be soon, and I beg you to see it. My time's up now. Next week we'll talk about the Nuremberg trials and that Music Man I've been promising, putting off for so long. I hope to have something more worth your attention. Anyway, please let me come to call again, and thanks for this time. Until then, my sponsors, the makers of Lear Radio, and I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is the American Broadcasting Company.
Thank you for listening to and showing your support for my podcast. If you would like to receive notifications of when new episodes are posted, please subscribe to my channel. Subscriptions are 100% free, and they really help me get an idea of how I'm doing.